Point of view of the lessor. From the point of view of the lessor, we can classify. Let's continue our discussion on leases. Let's now go to the point of view of the lessor. From the point of view of the lessor, we can classify the lease as either operating lease or finance lease, depending if there is a transfer of risks and rewards. If there is a transfer of risks and rewards, we classify the lease as finance lease. If there is no transfer of risks and rewards, we classify the lease as operating lease. Okay? Now, yun yung major difference between the lessor and the lessee. If you remember, sa point of view ni lessee, the general rule is finance lease. Meron lang tayong dalawang rare exceptions. Ano nga ba yun, class? If the lease is short-term or if the asset is of low value. Now, yung general rule na yun and exceptions, applicable lang yan kay lessee. Hindi yan applicable kay lessor. Kay lessor, pwedeng operating or finance lease depending if there's transfer of risks and rewards. Okay? Now, for operating lease, we will apply the same concepts we learned from the lessee, which is the straight line method. Under the straight line method, the lessor will recognize equal rental income every year even if unequal yung payments. Okay? So kung ano yung in-apply natin kay lessee, gawin lang din yung concepts na i-apply natin kay lessor. So later, magsasagot tayo ng straight line method under operating lease. Now, let's focus on finance lease. Again, magiging finance lease lang yan if there is a transfer of risks and rewards. Sir, tuwing kailan magkakaroon ng transfer of risks and rewards? If any of these 5 situations is present. Okay? Number 1 is if there is a transfer of ownership to the lessee. Okay, yun yung first. Now, magkakaroon na ng transfer of ownership to the lessee kapag nakasulat yan sa lease contract. Because by default, again, sa isang lease contract, pag natapos na yung lease term, yung asset, babalik yan kay lessor. So again, before magkaroon ng transfer of ownership to the lessee, it must be written in the lease contract. Number 2, if there is a bargain purchase option or BPO. Kung natutunan natin yung purchase option, ibig sabihin niyang class, merong right si lessee to buy the asset. Okay? Pero this time, hindi lang basta purchase option. Dapat yan, bargain. Pag sinabing bargain, ibig sabihin, makakatipid si lessee. Alright? So makakatipid si lessee if ibig sabihin yung payment ni lessee to buy the asset is significantly lower than the fair value of the asset. So again, bargain purchase option or BPO, if present yan, ibig sabihin, there is a transfer of risks and rewards, we classify the lease as finance lease. Okay? Number 3, if the lease term is a major part of economic life of the lease asset. So pag sabi economic life, ibig sabihin lang yan, useful life. Okay, so ano ibig sabihin ng major part? In practice, pag sabi mo major part, it means at least 75%. So when you say lease term is major part of economic life, it means the lease term is at least 75% of the useful life of the asset. So for example, your useful life is 10 and your lease term is 8 years, so 80% yan. Pasok yan sa major part. In that case, there is a transfer of risks and rewards. We classify the lease as finance lease. Okay, next is, if the present value of minimum lease payments or MLP amounts to substantially all of the fair value of the lease asset. Okay? Ulitin ko, if the present value of minimum lease payments amounts to substantially all of the fair value of the lease asset. So, ano ibig sabihin ng substantially all? In practice, when you say substantially all, it means at least 90%. So, it means the present value of minimum lease payments amounts to at least 90% of the fair value of the asset. In that case, there is a transfer of risks and rewards. We classify the lease as a finance lease. And last one, if the leased asset is of specialized nature. So, ano ibig sabihin ng specialized nature? Ibig sabihin niyang class, the leased asset requires major modifications. Okay, so for example, tayo si lessee. Okay, and then nag-lease tayo ng building. And yung building na yun, transform natin into nuclear power plant. Alright? So, syempre, bago ma-transform isang building sa nuclear power plant, kailangan ng major modifications yan. So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng specialized nature. Alright? Now, if any of these 5 situations is present, we classify the lease as finance lease. Take note ang sabi ko, any. Ibig sabihin, kahit isa lang dyan. Alright? Hindi necessary na dapat present lahat. Kahit isa lang dyan, finance lease na tayo. Alright? Now, if you take a look at number 1, transfer of ownership to the lessee, obviously, may transfer of ownership, may transfer of risks and rewards. Pero yung 2, 3, 4, and 5, yan yung application ng substance over form. Alright? Sige, now, we have 2 types of finance lease. Direct financing, let's call it DF, and sales type lease, let's call it ST. Doon muna tayo sa direct financing. Sir, ano ba yung direct financing lease? Actually, class, direct financing applies to companies in the Philippines that are engaged in leasing or financing. So, pag sinabi mong financing, ibig sabihin lang yung class is leasing. Okay? And in fact, yung mga direct financing companies na yan, these are the subsidiaries of major banks, mga bangko in the Philippines. I don't know if familiar kayo sa BDO Leasing. Okay? BDO Leasing is a subsidiary of Banco de Oro. Okay? Oryx Metro Leasing. Oryx Metro Leasing is a subsidiary of Metrobank. Okay? BPI Leasing, obviously, is a subsidiary of Bank of the Philippine Islands. So again, yung mga direct financing companies in the Philippines, usually, yung mga largest na ganyan, these are the subsidiaries of major banks in the Philippines. Alright? So ang ginagawa ng mga direct financing companies na yung class, usually nagpapa-lease out sila ng mga heavy equipment. Okay, ano ba examples ng heavy equipment? For example, trucks, ano pa, mga construction equipment. Okay, so for example, mga generators and so on and so forth. So para mas ma-visualize nyo, let's have an illustration. For example, tayo si BDO leasing. Okay, tayo si BDO, bibili tayo from the seller ng truck. Okay, ang gagawin natin dun sa truck na yun, ipapa-list out natin kay customer. Okay, so si customer, magbabayad sa atin ng rentals. Ayan, so ganyan ang nangyayari class in a direct financing. Now, tayo, point of view ni BDO, which is the lessor, mag-earn tayo ng, aside from rentals, meron din tayong interest income. And we know, ang tawag natin doon sa rate na ma-earn natin is the implicit interest rate. Okay, so this is how direct financing works. Now, punta tayo sa journal entries. Papakita ko sa inyo journal entry, point of view ni lessee and point of view ni lessor. Okay, point of view ni lessee, alam na natin yan. Debit right of use asset, credit lease liability, which is equal to the present value of minimum lease payments. Okay? Imi-mirror lang natin yan sa books ni lessor. So kung merong lease liability, si lessee, si lessor meron siyang lease receivable. Okay? But this time, at gross amount yan. Kung maalala nyo class, si lease liability, naka-present value yan. Tama? Si lease receivable, gross amount yan. What else? Now, since tayo si lessor, yung truck na yan, pina-lease out natin kay customer. So yung truck, let's call it equipment. Okay? So equipment siya, so magkikredit tayo ng equipment. Credit equipment, and then, yung balancing figure mo dyan class, ang tawag natin is unearned interest income or UII. Okay, so this is the journal entry in the books of the lessor. Debit lease receivable, gross amount, credit equipment, kasi yung truck, pinalease out natin kay customer, balancing figure, unearned interest income, or let's call it UII. Okay? Now, we have three concepts na dapat maintindihan kay lessor. Okay, very important. Gross investment, net investment, and unearned interest income. Pag sinabing gross investment, so gross siya, ibig sabihin total. Okay? So total yung class na minimum lease payments plus URV. Okay? So sir, ano ibig sabihin yan? Pag sinabing gross investment, minimum lease payments plus URV. Sir, ano nga ulit yung minimum lease payments? Tama ba class? Nandiyan yung rentals, nandiyan yung purchase option, nandiyan yung GRV. Naalala niyo pa yung kalasi? Pag sinabing minimum lease payments, rentals, purchase option, and GRV. And we know yung purchase option and GRV, hindi sila pwede mag-coexist at the same time. Plus unguaranteed residual value. Do-double underline ko yan. Mahalaga yan. Again, minimum lease payments plus URV. Yung total niyan, yun yung papasok dun sa gross investment. Okay? Pupunta dun sa lease receivable. So, ulitin ko. So, ibig sabihin class, sa point of view ni lessor, important sa kanya yung guaranteed residual value and unguaranteed residual value. Very important concept na maalala yun. Kung maalala nyo kay lessee, kapag may unguaranteed residual value, dinidisregard natin. Naalala nyo pa yun? Pero kay lessor, whether guaranteed or unguaranteed, important kay lessor yan. Bakit, sir? Kasi yung asset, kahit anong mangyari, whether guaranteed or guaranteed, babalik kay lessor yan. Ang difference na nila, pag guaranteed, si lessee may pinapromise sa'yo na certain value ni asset at the end of the lease term. Pag unguaranteed, walang pinapromise si lessee sa'yo. But either way, whether guaranteed or unguaranteed, ang mahalagang concept dyan class, babalik kay lessor yung asset. Gets ba yun? So kaya sa gross investment, whether guaranteed or unguaranteed, isasama natin yung sa computation yan. Alright? Now, when you say net investment naman class, basically ito yung cost of the equipment. Cost of equipment plus initial direct cost, if merong initial direct cost. So, maglagay tayo ng figures. So, for example, balik tayo sa illustration natin, bumili tayo ng truck from the seller worth 4 million. Okay? And then, pinarenta natin kay customer, 1 million per year for 5 years. Tama ba class? 1 million times per year for 5 years, that is 5 million. Okay, yung total. So, yung gross investment natin class, again, total ng rentals yan, ng purchase option, or kung may mga residual value, isasama mo yan. Sa illustration natin, to simplify, yung gross investments mo yan, yung 5 million. Alright? Yung net investment is the cost of equipment, okay? Plus initial direct cost if meron. In our illustration, that's 4 million. 5 million minus 4 million, difference nila is 1 million, ang tawag natin dyan, unearned interest income. Okay? Now, imagine niyo yung timeline na to class, no? So, pag nag-timeline tayo, tama ba sisingilin natin si customer na 1 million per year? So, lagyan natin dito, 1 million, 1 million, 1 million, 1 million, and 1 million. Okay? Marireceive natin from the customer yan. Ngayon, ang ginastos natin is 4 million. So, minus 4 million tayo dyan. Okay? Tawag natin sa 4 million, ito yung net investment. Ang tawag natin sa total na 1 million, hindi mo present value, naka-gross yan. Ang tawag natin dyan, gross investment. Now, pag present value mo yung 1 million per year na yan, okay? Dapat mag-equal yan sa 4 million using the implicit interest rate. Okay? Kasi pag sabi mo implicit interest rate, if you remember, yan yung target return ni lessor. So, ang target ni lessor, mag-earn siya ng, or 1 million per year, okay? Yung i-charge siya na renta kay customer, dapat yan, ma-recover niya yung ginastos niya na 4 million. Since pine-present value natin yung 1 million, okay? Pwede mo rin sabihin na yung net investment na yan, hindi yung present value of the minimum lease payments. Okay? So, ayan. Now, punta tayo dito sa journal entry. Balik tayo dyan. Okay na kayo sa illustration. Ulitin ko, ang mahalaga sa lessor, yung tatlong concepts na yan. Yan yung laging first step natin. Gross investment, basically total. Net investment, yung in-invest ni lessor, which is yung equipment, or kung may initial direct cost, isama mo yan. Difference nila is unearned interest income. Gusto ni lessor na ma-recover yung 4 million, okay? Sisingilin niya 1 million per year with using the implicit interest rate. Now, punta tayo dito ulit sa journal entries. Lagyan natin ang amount. From the point of view of the lessee, debit ROA, credit lease liability, sabi ko kanina, yan yung PV of IMLP, tama? Which is 4 million. So, walang problema dyan. Natutunan na natin yan from sa lessee's point of view. Now, kay lessor naman class, yung lease receivable dyan, sa illustration natin, dapat yan, nalagay mo 5 million. Okay? At gross amount. Yung equipment, obviously, 4 million yan. So, mag-credit tayo ng 4 million. UII natin is 1 million. O sir, bakit ganun? Yung lease liability, 4 million. Yung lease receivable, 5 million. Parang hindi balance sir. O, ganito yung class. Sa books ni lessor, ganito yung presentation in the balance sheet. Okay? Meron siyang lease receivable na 5 million. Less UII. Ayun, naka-minus pala yung UII. So it means yung UII is a contra lease receivable account. Ito yung net niya, 4 million. Alright? So pag tinanong sa'yo how much yung lease receivable, ang sasagot mo actually dyan is 4 million. Therefore, si lessee, meron siyang lease liability na 4 million. Si lessor, meron siyang lease receivable na 4 million. Equal sila. Okay? Sa journal entry, naka-gross lang yan. Pero sa presentation in the balance sheet, lease receivable minus UII. Okay? So that's how you present, ayan, the direct financing. Sige, so mamaya na yung sales type, apply muna natin yung concepts na yung class para dahan-dahan yung maging discussion natin. Let's go to illustrative example number 7. Illustrative example number 7, okay, this is about direct financing. Requirements, compute the total financial revenue to be recognized over the lease term. Pag sabi mong financial revenue, ibig sabihin nun, yung unearned interest income. So, sulat mo yun. Pag sabi yung financial revenue, unearned interest income. Bakit ganun, sir? Kasi, again, si lessor mag-earn siya ng implicit interest rate. Okay? Aside from the rentals, si lessor nag-earn din siya ng interest income. Okay? And then prepare the journal entries. Company exists in the business of leasing new sophisticated equipment. At the beginning of the year, the equipment was delivered to a lessee under a direct financing lease. With the following provisions. Cost of equipment, 390,000. Tama ba, class? Yung cost of equipment, yun yung gusto natin ma-recover. Okay? And then, annual rental, 600,000. Useful life and lease term, 10 years. Implicit rate, 11%. Binigyan tayo ng present value of ordinary annuity, 5.889. The entity incurred and paid initial direct cost of 143,400 in negotiating and arranging the lease. The equipment will revert to Company X at the end of the lease. Sabi ko dyan, yung net investment, cost of equipment plus initial direct cost. Okay? So para madalian kayo sa lessor, ganito class yan. Ang step 1 mo dyan, kukumpute mo yung gross investment, net investment, and UII. Pag na-compute mo na yan, madali na magsagot ng problem. So pakita ko sa inyo. Gross investment natin, sabi ko dyan, yan yung gross, basically yung minimum lease payments plus URV. In this case, yung mga rentals natin. So how much yung rentals natin per year? 600,000. And then, ilang years yung lease term? That is 10. Okay? So, ibig sabihin class, gross investments mo dyan, 6 million. Kasi wala naman sinabing purchase option, wala naman sinabing residual value. So, ibig sabihin, yung gross investment mo is just the rentals. Absolute amount yan or total amount yan. Huwag mo ipipresent value yung gross investment. Kaya siya tinawag na gross. Okay? Net investment natin. Ano nga ba ulit class yung net investment? Yan yung gusto natin ma-recover, yung ginastos natin, which is the cost plus the initial direct cost. So, ibig sabihin, 3,390,000. Okay? Lagyan natin dito. 3,390. Plus natin yung initial direct cost of 143,400. So, compute natin class, 3,390,000 plus 143,400, you get 3,533,400. 3,533,400. So, that's our initial or net investment. Difference sila, ang tawag natin dyan, unearned interest income. 6 million minus 3,533,400, UII natin is 24,666,600. Okay, so requirement number 1, compute the total financial revenue. Sagot mo dyan class, yung UII, 24,666,600. Because yung unearned interest income na yan, over the lease term, i-recognize natin siya as interest income or yung unearned magiging earned. Alright? Using yung effective interest method. Ibig sabihin, gagamit tayo ng amortization table. Okay, so, let's journalize. So again, sabi ko class, pag na-compute mo yung tatlo na yan, madali na yung lessor. Okay, so pwede natin i-journalize yan. January 1, 2025, debit lease receivable, which is at gross amount, 6 million. Credit equipment, 3,533,400. Credit UII, 24,666,600. Okay, so that's your journal entry, January 1, 2025. Take note, ang bayaran is every December 31. So, on December 31, ganito lang gagawin natin dyan. 2025, debit cash, credit lease receivable, 600,000. Okay? And then, syempre, mag-recognize tayo ng interest income. Okay? Kasi mag-amortize tayo. So, gagawin ko dyan, class, is yung net investment natin. Okay? So, sabi ko kanina ulit, yung lease liability mo is just equal to dun sa net na lease receivable, okay? Yung lease receivable mo is lease receivable minus UII, or in our registration kayo na 4 million, which is also the net investment, okay? So in this case, 3,533,400, multiply natin yung class by 11%, okay? 3,533,400 times 0.11, you get 388,674. 388,674. So ibig sabihin, entry natin on December 31, debit cash, credit lease receivable, 600,000, debit UII, credit interest income, 388,674. This is your journal entry, December 31, 2025. So basically, yung unearned interest income, nag-report tayo ng earned interest income. Tawag natin dyan, amortization. Okay, so, ayan. So, that's for number 7. And take note, kung mapapansin nyo class, wala tayong depreciation expense. Bakit sir? Kasi dinirecognize mo yung equipment, credit mo yan. Ang magre-record ng depreciation expense, si lessee. Kasi meron siyang right of use asset. Okay, so take note of that. O, practice pa tayo. Let's go to illustrative example number 8. Okay, sir, what if merong guaranteed and unguaranteed residual value? Ano ulit kailangan ating class malaman sa guaranteed and unguaranteed? Pag point of view ni lessor, whether guaranteed or unguaranteed, important kay lessor yan. Kasi babalik sa kanya yung asset. Pero kay lessee, ang important lang is guaranteed residual value. Okay, so let's take a look at the requirements. Compute the following assuming the residual value is guaranteed and unguaranteed. Gross investment, net investment, and UII. And then prepare the journal entries. So ganito gagawin ko dyan class. For illustrative example number 8, lagay natin dito GRV and lagay natin dito URV. Okay, so para side by side yung comparison natin. On January 1, Company X leased equipment to ABC. Information that is shown below. Cost of equipment, 330647. Alam natin, yan yung net investment. Okay. Useful life, 5 years. Lease term, 4 years. Annual rental, payable at the end of each year, 100,000. Interest rate, 10%. Residual value, 20,000. The equipment will revert back to Company X at the end of the lease term. The lease is classified as direct financing. Okay, so again, pag lessor, unang step, complete natin yung tatlo na. Gross investment, net investment, and UII. Doon muna tayo sa gross investment. Gross investment, basically, lahat ng marireceive ni lessor. Okay, so ganito gagawin ko dyan, class. Kasama dyan yung rentals. How much ulit yung rentals? 100,000 per year. Yung lease term is 4. 100,000 times 4, tama ba? 400,000 yan. So whether GRV or URV, syempre makaka-receive tayo ng 400,000 na rentals. What else? Sama natin dyan yung residual value. How much yung residual value? 20,000. Sabi ko kanina, papasok sa gross investment, whether GRV or URV. So lagay natin dito, 20,000. 20,000. Therefore, yung gross investment natin class is 420,000. Yun yung sagot mo sa requirement 1A. Gross investment. Gross investment under GRV, 420. Gross investment under URV, 420. Pareho lang sila. Okay? Let's go dun sa net investment. Yung net investment, pwede mong isipin, yan yung gustong ma-recover ni lessor. How much yun? Yung cost of equipment. So that is 330,647. 330,647. Whether GRV or URV, walang problema. Magkamukha lang yung net investment natin. UII is just the difference between the gross investment and net investment. 420,000 minus 330,647. You get 89,353. Okay, 89,353. So, mapapansin nyo class, so far, same lang lahat ng amounts, whether GRV or URV. Got it? Okay, so, tingnan natin. Dito magkakaiba yan, dun sa requirement number 2. Prepare the journal entries, may dalawa tayong scenarios. Sumunod tayo sa scenario 1. Okay, so lagay ko na dito, scenario 1. Tama ba? Meron tayong guaranteed, meron tayong unguaranteed. So, scenario 1, nakalagay, prepare the journal entries, the actual fair value or the residual value of the equipment is 20,000. Tama ba class? 20,000 daw yung fair value niya, ang pinapromise natin sa guaranteed residual value is also 20,000. Tama? So yung prinamise natin, yun yung naging value niya. So ibig sabihin, wala tayong additional cash na babayaran. So entry natin, kapag entry ni lessor, kapag binalik na sa kanya yung asset, pag GRV, debit equipment, credit lease receivable, okay, so re-record lang niya yung last na collection, yung pagbabalik sa kanya, 20,000. Debit equipment, credit lease receivable, 20,000. Okay? Because again, kung ano yung prinamis natin na 20,000, yun naman yung naging fair value niya. So, wala tayong additional payment. Kapag si lessee tayo, wala tayong additional payment kay lessor. Kapag si lessor ka, wala kang marireceive kay lessee. Pero different sa scenario number 2. Kasi sa scenario number 2 class, kung mapapansin mo dyan, nakalagay, the actual fair value or residual value of the equipment is 5,000. So, it means, 20,000 yung pinangako natin, pero ang value lang niya ngayon is 5,000. Merong difference na 15,000. Okay? Under guaranteed, kailangan bayaran tayo ni lessee dun sa 15,000 na yan. So, may entry natin, debit equipment, syempre, i-measure mo at fair value which is 5,000. Debit cash, ayun, meron kang debit cash na 15,000, credit lease receivable na 20,000. Dito magkakaroon ng major ng difference. Kapag guaranteed residual value, kapag hindi na-meet yung pinag-usapan nyo na 20,000, yung difference sa 15, babayaran ka ni lessee. Okay, kaya meron kang cash dyan. Pero kapag unguaranteed, ganito yung entry class. Debit equipment, 5,000. Debit loss, 15,000. Credit lease receivable, 20,000. So, instead na cash, i-charge mo dyan loss. Kasi wala namang obligation sa'yo si lessee kapag unguaranteed residual value. Nakita niyo yung difference? Kapag GRV, okay, kapag hindi na-meet yung pinag-usapan nyo na 20,000, magbabayad si lessee sa'yo. Pag URV, hindi magbabayad si lessee. So, si lessor, mag-record siya ng loss. Okay? So, sige. So, ito rin yung application class na kapag si lessee ka, ang important lang sa'yo si GRV. Kapag si lessor ka, ang important sa'yo, both si GRV and si URV. Okay? So, ayan. That's for illustrative example number 8. Okay, so, practice pa tayo class. Doon tayo sa illustrative example number 9. Dagdagan natin yung journal entries para mas ma-master pa natin yung direct financing. Illustrative example number 9, tingnan natin yung requirements. Compute the total financial revenue. Ano nga ba ulit class yung financial revenue? Basically, yun yung UII. Okay? And then requirement number 2, prepare amortization table. And requirement 3, journal entries 2025, 26, 27, 28. Siyempre yung entries, kukunin lang natin yan from the amortization table. Okay? So, tayo ko dito, illustrative example number 9. Alright, on January 1, Company X lease an equipment to another entity. The cost of the equipment, 1,377,480. Tama ba class? Yung cost na yan, yun yung net investment. Tama? Okay, which approximates the fair value. The economic life, 4 years. The lease payments stipulated in the lease are for 40,000 per year in advance. For a 4-year period, the payments include 40,000 executory costs. O, tanggalin mo yung 40,000 kasi again, yung executory costs, si lessee ina-expense yan. Therefore, si lessor, income naman yan. Okay? So, 440 minus 40, lagay mo dyan, 400,000. The title to the equipment remains in the hands of Company X, although only nominal residual is expected. Implicit interest rate is 11%. Okay. So sabi ni sir, kapag lessor, mag-start daw sa gross investment. Gross investment, lahat na marireceive ni lessor. So ibig sabihin, yung payment rentals na 400,000 per year, tanggalin mo yung executory cost, hindi kasama yan sa gross investments. Multiply natin by 4 years yung lease term. So that is 1.6 million gross investments. I-minus mo yung net investment, which is yung gusto ma-recover ni lessor, which is the cost, 1,377,480. Okay, difference nila, 1.6 million. Minus 1,377,480, you get UII of 225,520. Okay, so yun yung sagot natin sa 222,520. Okay, so this is our answer for requirement number 1. Compute the total financial revenue, answer natin 222,520. If you notice class, kapag lessor, laging first step natin, gross investment, net investment, and UII. From there, madali na nating magagawa yung problems. Okay, so create tayo ng amortization table. So ganito gagawin class, we have date. Okay, we have received naman kasi tayo si lessor. Interest income, again, lessor tayo, kaya may interest income tayo. Amortization and carrying amount. Interest natin here is 11%. Lalagay ko na dyan. January 1, 2025, in advance daw. So may isa pa January 1, 2025, January 1, 2026, 2027, and 2028. So lagay natin yung present value natin or yung carrying amount is just gross investment minus UII. Tama ba class yun? Gross investment minus UII, yun yung basically net investment natin. So yun yung papasok sa amortization table, right? So lagyan natin dito 1,377,480. Bayaran natin yung first payment na 400,000 which is same day, January 1, 400,000. Therefore, yung carrying amount natin will be 977,480. So i-complete ko class yung amortization table, bibilisan ko na lang. Receive natin is 400,000 per year. So lagay ko siya dyan. And then interest income 977,480 times 11%, 107,523. Difference nila amortization is 292,477, carrying amount is 685,003. Okay, so interest income for 2027, 75,350. Amortization is 324,650. Carrying amount is 360,353. And then last year, interest income is 39,647. Amortization is 360,353. Carrying amount is 0. Okay, so this is the complete amortization table. Once meron tayong amortization table, pwede na tayong mag-journal entries. Well, start mo tayo with January 1. January 1, 2025, gross investment muna. Debit lease receivable, 1.6 million. Credit equipment, okay, 1,377,480. Credit UII, 222,520. And don't forget na yung unang payment is January 1. So meron tayong debit cash, credit lease receivable, 400,000. Okay, so let's go to December 31, 2025. So ang unique dito, compared dun sa lessee, kay lessee kung maalala mo, lease liability lang yan, tama? Pero kay lessor, meron kang lease receivable and meron kang UII. So may konting difference sa entry. So papakita ko sa inyo class. On December 31, ang gagawin natin dyan is, so tingin ka dito, meron tayong interest income, tama? Ang entry mo dyan, debit UII, credit interest income, 107,523. Alright? Pero yung 400,000, bukas mo pa yan marireceive. January 1. So January 1, pakita ko yung entry. So sa December 31, don't forget na merong executory cost dito. Executory cost, kay lessee expense yan. Kay lessor, income yan. Okay? Debit cash, credit other income na lang, 40,000. Right? And January 1, 2026, marireceive natin yung 400,000. Entry mo dyan, debit cash, credit lease receivable, 400,000. Yan. So ganyan yung entries natin for 2025 and 2026. Okay, so ituloy na rin natin yung entries kasi sabi sa requirement number 3, 26, 27, 28. So, para ma-master natin. Okay, December 31, 2026, entry natin, debit UII, credit interest income, 75,350. Alright? And then, don't forget to record yung executory cost. Siyempre, income natin yan. Huwag natin siya isama sa journal entries natin. Okay, so January 1, 2027, debit cash, credit lease receivable, marireceive natin yung 400,000. Okay, December 31, 2027, meron tayong interest ulit, debit UII, credit interest income, how much this time? 39,647, And then, kinabukasan, January 1, 2028, debit cash, credit lease receivable, 400,000. So as you notice, lahat ng entries natin based lang sa amortization table. So ang ginawa ko, gross investment, net investment, UII. From there, nag-create ako ng amortization table. Yung carrying amount doon, syempre yung net investment ilalagay mo dyan. Okay? Kasi ang presentation in the balance sheet, lease receivable minus UII, which is also equal to your net investment. Entries, ayun, tumingin lang tayo sa amortization table. Okay, so this is illustrative example number 9. Punta tayo dun sa main problem natin, class, no? Still about direct financing. Pero for this one, papakita ko sa inyo, lessee and lessor naman. No? Para mas ma-visualize natin yung different perspectives. Let's go to main problem number 1. Okay, main problem number 1. Tingnan natin. So, handouts natin, main problem number 1, we have 5 questions. Okay. Question number 1, what is the annual lease payment? O tinatanong sa atin, how much daw yung babayaran ni lessee every year? Number 2, total financial revenue. Pag financial revenue, alam natin, UII, ibig sabihin yan. Question number 3, interest income. Question number 4, total expenses related to the lease. So, ibig sabihin, lessee naman, point of view. Question number 5, current liabilities. So, tinatanong sa atin, lessor and lessee. Let's read the given. Jacqueline Corporation is in the business of leasing new sophisticated systems. As a lessor of computers, it purchased a new system on December 31, 2021. The system was delivered the same day to Company X lessee. The following information are related to the lease transaction. Okay, cost of the system, 550,000. Estimated useful life, 8 years. Expected residual value, unguaranteed. Underline mo yan, unguaranteed. Pag unguaranteed, ano nga ba class yan? Kapag URV, hindi yan important kay lessee. So, tayo dito. Pag URV, lessee and lessor. So, lessee, lessor. Hindi yan important kay lessee, pero important yan kay lessor. Tama? Next, implicit rate, 12%. Incremental borrowing rate, ignore mo yan kasi given naman yung implicit rate. Date of first lease payment, December 31, 2021, which is the same day. Okay, ibig sabihin in advance yan. And then, additional information, at the end of the lease, the system will revert to the company. X is aware of the implicit interest. The lease rental consists of equal payments. Ganito class gagawin ko sa question number 1. Nakalagay dyan, how much daw yung annual lease payment? Okay, kakaiba yung question kasi usually, given sa atin sa problem yung annual lease payment. Ang tanong sa number 1, how much daw yung annual lease payment? Ganito gagawin ko dyan class. Yung cost natin na 550,000, iyon yung gusto nating ma-recover. Tama ba? Parang sa illustration natin. Ito yung cost, gusto natin siyang ma-recover from our gross investments or from the rentals. Ngayon, si lessor ka, tama? Yung 550,000 na yan, ma-recover mo yan through rentals and through URV. Kasi whether URV or GRV, ma-receive mo yung asset. Okay? So, ang gagawin ko dito, class, kukomputing ko muna yung present value ng URV natin. Okay? So, tulungan nyo mag-compute. In this case, 12%. Okay? So, gagawin ko dyan, yung URV natin, which is how much? 40,000. Multiply natin sa PV factor. Hindi siya given yata. Okay, so 1.12, ilang years? 8 years. Divide 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 0.4039. Okay? Times 0.4039. So, multiply natin. You will get here 16,155. So, ang gagawin ko dyan, class. Okay, so ang tinatanong dito, how much daw yung lease payments, o yung annual lease payments. Ngayon, si lessor, marireceive niya yung URV na yan, 16,155. Okay? Pero marireceive ba niya yan kay lessee? Hindi siya babayaran ni lessee. Pero marireceive niya yung asset from the lessee. Okay? So, ima-minus ko yan. 16,155. So, ano yung difference yan? 550,000 minus 16,155, you get 533,845. Sir, ano yung 533,845? Ito class yung isa-charge natin na rentals to the lessee. Nakuha niyo ba yan? So, ulitin ko. Ito yung gustong ma-recover ni lessor, 550,000. Ngayon, merong URV. Minus ko yan. Bakit mo minus, sir? Kasi yung URV, hindi naman natin sinisingil yan kay lessee. Tama ba? Wala namang obligation si lessee to pay the URV. Tanggalin mo yan. Ang sisingilin mo lang kay lessee para ma-recover yung 533,845. Paano natin malalaman yan? I-divide mo lang yan by the PV factor. Okay? So, compute natin yung PV factor. Meron tayong 12%. Okay? And then 8 years. So, 1.12 divide equals and then M plus tayo na 8 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Recall memory. Makukuha mo dyan 4 point. Ulit. So, ulitin ko. So, 1.12 divide equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? Nakuha ko dyan is, in advance pala to. Ayun, nalito ko dun. Pag in advance, 7 na M plus, pa-plus mo sa 1 sa dulo. Okay? So, ulitin ko. In advance yan. So, 1.12 divide equals M plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 lang. And then plus 1 ka dyan. Plus 1. Nakuha ko dyan, 5.5638. Ayun. 5.5638. So, ibig sabihin class, 533,845, i-divide natin yung by 5.5638, yung annual rental natin is 95,950. Ayun, letter boy yung sagot natin dyan. Huwag ka malilito. Ito yung gusto ma-recover ni lessor. Pero marireceive niya yung URB. Pero hindi naman si lessee magbabayad ng URB, kaya nga unguaranteed eh. So, ibig sabihin, yung 533,845, iyan lang yung pwede mong i-charge kay lessee. Divide by PV factor, ito yung rentals natin. Alright? So, pwede mo isipin yan ganito, class. So, tama ba? Merong 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So every year, sisingilin mo siya 95,950. Every year yan. Okay? Pag present value mo yung class, ang marireceive mo is 533,845. So parang gano'n, para ma-visualize mo siya. Every year, bayad ng 95,950. Pag present value mo yan using the implicit interest rate, mag-i-equal siya sa 533,845. So na-recover natin yung 533,845. Question number 1, answer is boy 95,950. Question number 2, the total financial revenue, gross investment minus net investment, you get the UII. Okay, sabi ni sir, yan daw yung first step. Gross investment, lahat na marireceive ni lessor. Ano yung marireceive niya? Well, marireceive niya yung rentals, 95,950, 8 times niya marireceive yan. Okay, what else? Well, marireceive din ni lessor yung URV na 40,000. Huwag mo ipe-present value kasi gross nga eh. Okay, so 95,950 times 8 plus 40,000, gross investment mo, 807,600. Net investment is basically yung gusto nating ma-recover, which is 550,000. Minus 550,000, yan yung net investment. Okay, so again, pag si lessor ka, yung residual value, whether guaranteed or unguaranteed, mapupunta sa'yo yun. So part yun sa net investment mo. 807,600 minus 550,000, UII natin is 257,600. Sagot natin dyan, class. For question number 2 is A, 257,600. Question number 3. The interest income to be recognized by the lessor. Well, ganito lang gagawin ko dyan. Tama ba yung net investment? Iyan yung basis ng interest income natin. 550,000. Kaya lang, ang bayaran ng 95,950, yung first payment yan is today. So, minus ko yan. 95,950. So, 550,000 minus 95,950. Tama ba, class? Yung 454,050, ito yung carrying amount of the lease receivable as of January 1, 2022. Okay? Tama ba? So, January 1, 2022. Ang tanong sa atin is interest income 2022. Okay? So, 550, nagbayad same day, or actually December 31, 2021. So, ito yung carrying amount sa start of the year. Tama? Multiply mo yan by the implicit interest rate of 12% for 54050 times 0.12. That is 54,486. Sagot natin, class, question number 3. Letter C, 54,486. Sir, ano ulit ginawa mo? Lease receive net investment na 550. Bakit, sir, net investment? Kasi presentation in the balance sheet is gross investment minus UII. So, 807,600 minus 257,600, yun din yung net investment. Kaya yun nilagay ko dyan. Okay? Kaya lang, nagbayad ka same day, 95,950. Nagbayad si lessee. O, ito lang yung carrying amount mo. Times 12%, outstanding siya for the whole year. Interest income, 54,486. Letter C for question number 3, 54,486. Let's go to question number 4. Total expenses. So, i-raise ko na yan. Total expenses to be, or to the lease that will be recognized by the lessee. Okay, so pag si lessee ka, tama ba, class, ang expense mo yung interest expense and depreciation expense. Huwag mo makalimutan yung depreciation expense. So, yung lease liability ni lessee is how much? Okay, so tanungin ko kayo, class, how much yung lease liability ni lessee dito? Is it 550,000 or 533,845? Is it 550,000 or 533,845? Answer is 533,845. Bakit, sir? Kasi pag si lessee ka, hindi important sa'yo yung unguaranteed residual value. Okay? So yung PV of MLP is just the rentals, 95,950, multiply mo by 5.5638, yun din yung 533,845. Okay? But take note, nagbayad si lessee ng 95,950 same day. Okay? So minus natin yan. 533,845 minus 95,950. So yung lease liability is 437,895. 437,895. Multiply natin by 12%. Yung interest expense si lessee is 52,547. This is the interest expense. Huwag mo kalimutan na magdi-depreciate si lessee kasi meron siyang ROA. Okay? Depreciation expense, let's compute. So, depreciation expense ni lessee, ito rin yung ROA. Tama? Kasi debit ROA, credit lease liability. So, yung ROA, 533,845, i-divide natin by the lease term of 8 years, 533,845. Divided by 8, you get 104. Tama ba? So, dito ko, 533,845. Divide natin by 8 years. Nakuha ko dyan, class, 66,731. 66,731. This is the depreciation expense. So, meron tayong interest expense na 52,547 plus 66,731 na depreciation expense. 119,278, the total expense. Letter dog. And the last one, the amount to be reported under current liabilities. O, sabi ni sir, kapag ganyan, pwede tayong gumamit ng partial amortization table. Okay? So, ang gagawin ko dyan, meron tayong date, meron tayong payment, tayo si lessee. Okay? Interest expense, amortization, and carrying amount. So, meron tayong January 1, 2021, or sorry, December 31, 2021, yung first day natin. Nagbayad tayo same date, December 31, 2021, December 31, 2022, and December 31, 2023. Yung present value natin, which is 533,845, lagay natin dyan. And then, nagbayad tayo na 95,950. Okay, 95,950, carrying amount natin, 437,895. Kompletuhin natin yung amortization table. 95,950 per year, yung payment natin. Interest expense in 2022 is 52,547. Amortization is 43,403. Carrying amount is 394,492. And last year, Or next year, 12/31/2023, interest expense is 47,339. Amortization is 48,611. Carrying amount is 345,881. Ano nga ba kasi yung sabi ko? How much yung current liability? Ang pinag-uusapan natin is December 31, 2022. Okay? So yung total liability mo is 394,492. Kapag ang tanong is how much yung lease liability, sagot mo 394,492. Ang tanong sa atin is how much to yung current liabilities. Okay, sagot mo dyan yung amortization next year. 48,611, letter B or boy, 48,611. Pag ang tanong is non-current liability, ang isagot mo dyan, 345,881. So boy for question number 5. Okay. That's for direct financing. Okay, now, punta naman tayo dito class sa sales type lease. So, ano difference ng direct financing and sales type lease? In a sales type lease, the leasing company is a manufacturer and seller. Manufacturer and seller. So, ano ibig sabihin ng manufacturer and seller? For example, class, yung leasing company si ABC. Okay, so ang gagawin ni ABC will manufacture or manufactures and ABC manufactures and sells trucks. Okay? Kung maalala nyo class sa direct financing, si BDO bumili kay seller. Sa sales type lease, yung leasing company mismo, siya yung nagmamanufacture. Okay? So, para mas madali ang kaintindihin, isipin mo na si direct financing, para siyang merchandising. Bibili siya ng finished goods, ibebenta niya or i-lease out niya kay customer. Si sales type lease, pwede mong isipin na para siyang manufacturing. Bibili siya ng raw materials, ima-manufacture niya, tsaka niya i-lease out kay customer. Okay? So, ganoon ang nangyayari, class. So, manufacture, gawa siya ng truck, i-lease out niya kay customer. That's what you call sales type lease. Actually, kung naririnig niyo yung rent to own, okay? Rent to own, yun yung sales type lease talaga. Okay? So in that case, since nagmamanufacture and nagbebenta ng truck si leasing company, ibig sabihin class, pag nagbenta siya kay customer, sinasamahan niya ng markup. With markup, okay, yung cost na magagastos ng ABC, dagdagan niya ng markup, yun yung price or mabibenta niya kay customer. Okay? So in that case, aside from rentals na ibabayad sa kanya ni customer, si ABC mag-earn siya ng interest income plus markup. Right? So, yun yung difference lang. Kasi sa direct financing, interest income lang sa rentals. Kay sales type, meron ka interest income, may rentals, meron ka pang markup. Okay? So, it means, pag sales type lease, nagmamanufacture and nagsasell, ibig sabihin, yun yung ordinary course of business of the company. Kung yun yung ordinary course of business, under sales type lease, kailangan mag-recognize ng sales and cost of goods sold. Okay? Dito, wala. Wala kang sales and cost of goods sold under direct financing. Sa sales type, meron. Okay? So, ito klaseng journal entry dyan. So, listen carefully. Sa lessor's point of view, okay, sa balance sheet niya, meron siyang entry niya is debit lease receivable, still at gross amount. Okay, same lang, gross amount. Credit sales, credit UII. Ayun, ito yung main difference yan. Meron sales. Kung maalala nyo dito class, sa direct financing, debit lease receivable, same. Walang problema. Doon siya nagkaiba. Sa direct financing, credit equipment at cost. Dito, credit sales. And then credit UII. Now, very important, yung sales, sir, how much yung sales na yan? Ko-compare mo dalawang amounts. Present value of minimum lease payments and yung fair value of the leased asset. Iko-compare mo yung dalawa na yan. Okay? So, titingnan mo yung truck. Compare ka ng present value of minimum lease payments, compare natin yan. And yung fair value ng truck, piliin mo whichever is lower. Lower ha? Sir, paano natin maalala na lower yan? Tandaan mo class, nagre-recognize tayo ng sales. Ibig sabihin, revenue recognition yung pinag-uusapan natin. And in accounting, kapag revenue recognition, we have to be conservative. Okay? So, pag nagre-record ka ng sales or revenue, conservative tayo. That's why pipiliin mo is lower. Hindi applicable yung rule na yan sa direct financing. Hindi naman natin pinag-usapan kanina yan. Okay? What else? Since ordinary course of business yan, aside from sales, mag-record din ng cost of goods sold. Debit cost of goods sold, credit inventory. Okay? Again, ito rin yung main difference between sales type and direct financing. Okay, so para mas ma-appreciate natin yung class, let's move on to illustrative example number, saan na ba tayo? I think number 10 na tayo. Okay, illustrative example number 10 for sales type. Pakita ko sa inyo class yung journal entries and I'll show you na halos similar lang din siya sa direct financing. May mga accounts lang tayo na magkaiba yung gagamitin natin but essentially, same lang naman sila. Okay? So sige, erase ko muna and let's read the given. So sabi dyan, prepare journal entries in the books of Company X for 2025 and 2026. Okay, so let's read the given. On January 1, 2025, Company X leased equipment to Company Y for an 8-year period expiring January 1. Equal payments under the lease are 600,000 and are due on January 1 each year. The first payment was made on January 1. The rate of interest is 10%, in implicit interest rate. The fair value of the equipment, which is equal to the present value of lease payments, is 3,520. Uy, equal daw to. Fair value of lease asset and the present value of MLP equal daw. So wala tayong problema. Equal lang sila. So okay, so 3,520. And the cost of the equipment is 2.8 million. Yung cost na yung class, yun yung cost of goods sold. Alright? Company X paid initial direct cost. Negotiating na rin yung list. Yung initial direct cost na yan, sulat mo din dyan, cost of goods sold din yan. Bakit sir? Kasi yung initial direct cost na yan, necessary yan. So inventoriable yan. Pag yung inventory na benta mo, magiging cost of goods sold yan. So yung cost na 2.8 and yung initial direct cost of 50,000, parehong i-charge natin yan sa cost of goods sold, right? Sige, now, the lease is appropriately recorded as a sales type lease. Sir, paano mo sasagutan yung illustrative example number 10? Oh, balik ka lang doon sa sinabi ko kanina. Kapag magsasagutan ng lessor, lagi ka mag-start with the gross investment, net investment, and UII. Okay, so from this, kayang-kaya natin sagutan yan. Tingnan natin yung gross investment. How much yung rentals per year? Tama ba class nakalagay dyan? 600,000 per year. Multiply natin by 8 years, kasi yung lease term, therefore we have 4.8 million. Net investment natin, we have nakalagay, so yung net investment mo sa present value of MLP or fair value of lease asset, 3,520,000. Okay? So yung difference nila class. Kung maalala nyo sa direct financing, yung net investment natin is equal to the cost. Dito hindi. Net investment natin is 3,520,000. So UII, 4.8 million minus 3,520,000, you get 1,280,000. This is our UII. From here, madali natin masosolve yung problem. January 1, 2025, entry natin, debit lease receivable, 4.8 million. Credit sales, 3,520,000. Credit UII, 1,280,000. Alright? And don't forget na meron tayong cost of goods sold. Yung cost natin is 2.8 million. Debit cost of goods sold, credit inventory, 2.8 million. What else? Meron tayong initial direct cost. Sabi ko kanina, charge mo din sa cost of goods sold yan. Debit cost of goods sold, credit inventory, credit cash. Okay, kasi ginastos natin yung initial direct cost, 50,000. Okay, yun yung entry natin on January 1. And don't forget din pala na yung bayaran natin is in advance. Okay? So how much per year? 600,000. Debit cash, credit lease receivable, 600,000. Pag tinanong sa isa problem, how much daw yung gross profit or yung markup? How much yung gross profit natin? Meron tayong sales na 3,520, i-minus mo yung 2.8 na cost, i-minus mo yung 50,000 na cost of goods sold. So, 3,520 minus 2.8 million minus 50,000. Pag ang tanong sa'yo is gross profit, sagot mo dyan, 670,000. Yan yung difference sa sales type lease. Sa sales type lease, nagre-record din tayo ng markup or markup yun din yung gross profit natin. Direct financing, wala kang nare-record na gross profit. Alright? Sige. And then, tignan natin. Let's create a partial amortization table. So, meron tayong date para magawa natin yung ibang entries. We have received, okay, we have interest income, amortization, and carrying amount. Okay, so date natin is January 1, 2025. First payment is January 1, 2025, January 1, 2026, January 1, 2027. Okay, 600,000 per year yung marireceive natin from the lessee. Carrying amount natin from the given is 3,520,000. Yan yung present value din of minimum lease payments. Tama? First payment is 600,000. Carrying amount, January 1, 2025 is 2,920,000. Let's complete the table. 2026, interest rate natin dito class is ilang percent ba dyan? Okay, 10% nakalagay. Okay, 10%. 2,920 times 10%, that's 292,000. Amortization natin is 308,000. Carrying amount, 2,612,000. Times 10%, we get 2,612,000. Amortization is 338,800. Carrying amount is 2,273,200. Okay, so create lang ako ng partial amortization table para maging guide natin yan sa journal entries natin. Let's go to December 31, 2025. So focus tayo dito sa table na yan. Okay, so meron tayong interest income, debit UII, credit interest income, how much ulit? 292,000. Alright? And then January 1, 2026, next day, we have debit cash, credit lease receivable, 600,000. And then December 31, 2026, recognize ulit tayo ng income, debit UII, credit interest income, 261,200. And take note, since tayo si lessor, okay, wala tayong depreciation. Ang nagdi-depreciate, si lessee. Okay. So key points to remember siguro for illustrative example number 10. Mag-recognize ka ng sales. Okay, initial direct cost and yung cost of the, in this case, cost of the equipment, i-charge mo yan sa cost of goods sold. So sales minus cost of goods sold, that's your gross profit. Alright? And then, what else? Create ng amortization table, yan yung guide natin to prepare the journal entries. Okay, that's for illustrative example number 10.